Welcome to the webinar, Exceeding the Expectations of Chinese Travelers. This is being co-hosted by Pandion Consulting and Facilitation and Perspective China. And we have a key goal here today, and that is we want to give you some tools to kick off, for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere heading into summer, to kick off the busy summer season, being able to create some incredible experiences for your Chinese visitors. We're not going to dive too deep into methodology and process. We've got two other webinars scheduled this year that is going to do a deeper dive. The objective today is just to give you some quick ideas of how to quickly implement some actions that could make your programs a lot better and more influential for our guests. So again, thank you for signing up, and this is being recorded, and we will be sending out a follow-up to this email, so be sure to look out for that. If you have questions throughout the webinar today, there's the chat function, and it should say going to organizers and panelists when you hit that chat. And we've got my colleague Sean is monitoring the chat, and we'll be able to answer your questions. So if you're wondering who I am, my name's Dan Moore. I'm the CEO of Pandion Consulting and Facilitation. Pandion works around the globe to help destinations better prepare their destinations for their visitors, help incubate travel businesses, especially in the experiential travel realm. But then I also work directly with companies themselves, working on bettering their operations, training guides, training behind the scenes staff. And a big part of what we're trying to do is raise the standards, the quality and sustainability of the travel industry. And I think this topic very much hits on that, because Chinese travelers, it's a growing market, and there's a great opportunity for us to really have a positive impact on both these travelers and make sure that when these travelers are visiting our communities, the communities are benefiting as well. My co-host today is my longtime friend Fa Na, and she's coming in from Beijing, China. So I'm in Seattle, she's in Beijing, and that's what's the beauty of our modern world, is that we're both co-hosting today from around the globe. And you're going to be hearing from Fa Na very shortly. She'll introduce herself. Again, key takeaways for our webinar today. Well, we already know China is a growing market. Probably most of you have signed up for this because you're aware of that and you're excited to be able to tap into that market. And so a growing market is good for business, and if done right, meaning that if we set up our businesses appropriately and have the right programs, then this can be good for the world as well. And that's really a key motivator for me in putting on this webinar. And because of that, tourism has an opportunity to create positive change. There's as we know, China is one of the most populous countries in the world. They're now moving into first place in terms of most travelers. And so this is a great opportunity to share values back and forth, both learn from our Chinese travelers as well as share a little bit about who we are to them. And anytime we have that type of cultural exchange, I believe that there's something positive that can come from it. So that's really our key motivators today. And again, what we want to do is give you the opportunity to have some ways to quickly apply to make sure that your programs in the next few months are going to meet these travelers' needs, and again, have that opportunity for positive change. So just everybody likes to know what's going to happen. Very shortly, I'm going to turn things over to Fa Na. She's going to speak for about 25 minutes on elements of the big picture, what's going on with the Chinese traveler, what are their motivations, who are they, and then managing expectations for them. Again, knowing what their expectations are ahead of time are going to greatly increase your opportunity to create fantastic experiences for them. And just a little bit about the Chinese culture. Again, a big part of travel is not just passively observing, but that exchange of culture. That's what's so special about travel. And so the more you know about who your guests are, the better opportunity you're going to have to learn. I'm going to take over after that and briefly share some ideas that you could incorporate in order for experiences that will be maximized for folks with English as a second language. And just to clarify, my language is English. But if you are Spanish speaking or whatever, this would apply to any of your guests that don't speak your language that you're leading your tours in. And then some customer service considerations. Finally, we'll finish off the hour with Q&A from between me and Fa Na. I'm going to try and, while she's presenting, come up with some really tough questions. So we'll see what we answer there. And then very important is to make sure that you are participating in this as well. So be sure to, in the chat function, type any questions you might have. And I'd like to turn things over to Fa Na. She's going to take control of the mouse here so she can move the screen along, and she'll tell you a bit about who she is.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dan, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today and co-hosting this webinar with Dan. So let me quickly introduce myself, starting from my name, as I receive that question often. So my name is Fan Na. Fan is my last name, and Na is my first name. Chinese name put last name first. Also, it is quite common to address someone by their full name in China, so feel free to address me as Fan Na. And about my background, I have the experience in both inbound and outbound travel, focusing on high-end market, adventure, experiential travel. So in the past over 10 years, I have worked with some world-leading travel companies, which is absolutely great experience. So during the process, I find there are so many great overseas travel companies that want to do business in China, but with a lot of challenges and obstacles because of the uniqueness of the China market. So it is very hard to understand. And that's why I started Perspective China to serve as a bridge. I understand the culture and the business from both worlds. So my goal is to help travel companies to do business in China successfully and smoothly. So that's about me and Perspective China. Now let's get to learn something about this market. So Dan, can you help me change the slides? I couldn't. Okay. So first of all, let's start with the map. I'm not trying to show you where China is on the world map, but what I'm showing here is that in my conversation with a lot of tour companies, I find sometimes when people think of they want to get business from China market, they're always thinking of getting something started from the nearby Asian market, like Japan, Korea, or Hong Kong, or Taiwan, something smaller as a test before they head to China. But I have to tell you, it would be a waste of time if the mainland China is your goal, because China market is not a matter of size, but is totally different. It is so unique that everyone has to go through a learning curve to be successful. Even you have experience with Hong Kong or Taiwanese traveler, the travel market is still different because in Hong Kong and Taiwan, the travelers are more experienced than the mainland Chinese traveler. If you want the China business, my suggestion is go to China, work with the right people in the market. And where do Chinese travelers go? So when come to choose a destination, often it's related what's trendy right now. It can started by a movie or a TV show. For example, 2 years ago, there is a very popular TV show that brought a lot of celebrities to South America and Antarctica, which make these two destinations become very popular. And also, we cannot ignore the big environment, which is the government policy. For example, after One Belt, One Road conference happened in Beijing last May, it drives a large increase of visit to the destinations along this belt and road. So it is important to know the market trend firsthand, which will help you to get ready for this market. So So when do we travel? We like to travel during the national holidays. One of the reasons is because we only have 5 days annual leave. So if we want to travel to long haul, we have to combine it with other national holidays. There are two long national holidays. One is the Chinese New Year, which is normally around February. The other one is the national holiday in the first week of October. There are also a few short holidays. For example, the Tomb Sweeping Day in the first week of April, the Labor Day, which is in the first week of May, and the Dragon Boat Festival in the mid-June. Of course, there are people also travel during like summer time with their children, so which make family travel become also a popular trend. As more and more family will use travel as a way of education for their children. So to know when the Chinese travelers travel, then you can be prepared because Chinese guests are known for the very last minute booking. Normally, they will book only 1 to 2 months in advance, even in high season. So when a large number of Chinese travelers come to you, you need to be ready because once they decide to book, it will be a very quick conversion. But if you don't have the right product and availability, they will be very disappointed and go away. Okay, so when they are on the trip, when they're traveling with you, how to meet and exceed their expectations. First of all, food and drink. If you get the food right, most likely the Chinese guests will be happy. You probably know that a Chinese meal is very important. That is true, but we don't need it every single day. As Chinese guests are also interested in trying local cuisine. At the same time, they also want something they're familiar with. For example, if you are creating a program of 7 days in your destination, try to arrange at least 3 Chinese meals during the trip. It can be lunch or dinner. If there's no Chinese restaurant available, you can bring them to Asian restaurant instead. However, if you do arrange Chinese, make sure it's authentic. For example, when I was with a group in Peru, where there are a lot of chifas, the Peruvian Chinese restaurant, as I brought the guests there, the guests are not seem impressed because foreign Chinese food are not Chinese food to them. That is a different cuisine. Then as we traveled to Bolivia, as we wandered around on the street, they found a Chinese restaurant opened by someone from Beijing, and the dishes taste just like home. Because this group of guests have been traveling in South America for 2 weeks and then they have not had proper Chinese food for the past 2 weeks. So even I was surprised to see that they were eating at that Chinese restaurant every single meal for the next 3 days. Then you know why it is so important for us. So if you cannot find authentic Chinese restaurant in the area, try talk to restaurants or hotels that are flexible enough for you to use their kitchen. Sometimes the guest wouldn't mind to cook something themselves, and the dishes can be very easy. For example, this dish in this PowerPoint is tomato and egg dish is a very common home cooking dish and it only requires 2 ingredients. And another alternative is to have cup noodles. The picture on the right is a very common cup noodle brand in China. If you can find it in the local Chinese market, the guests will also appreciate it and think you have been very thoughtful in preparing this for them. Another note is about mealtime, because we tend to have lunch relatively earlier, around 12 p.m. or 12:30. So dinner around 6:30 to 7 p.m. If it's a late lunch, so make sure you prepare some snacks and also let the guests know that they will have a late lunch. Otherwise, they were expecting a lunch to happen at 12. About drinks. So there is an interesting story I want to share with you. So when I was traveling Antarctica with a group of Chinese guests, we spent 17 days visiting the Peninsula, Falklands, and South Georgia. I became good friend with the bartender. At the end of the trip, we were chatting about his next cruise departure, and he told me, you know, when we know which country the guest's from, we need to stock different drinks. If there are more German on board, I will prepare more beers. For American, more whiskey. For British, more gin. Then I asked him, how about Chinese? What do you need to prepare? He said, that's easy. All I need is hot water. It is the correct answer because what you will be requested a lot on the trip is actually hot water from Chinese guests. We don't like to drink iced water. So if you're about to offer guests some water, remember to offer either room temperature or ask if you want hot water. And then also you will notice they always like to bring their own thermos or water bottle filled with hot water. While speaking of this, I also need to mention here I'm talking about typical behaviors of Chinese guests. Of course, there are many Chinese guests who drink ice water and doesn't require Chinese food. So you can learn what kind of guests are through your travel agency or your partner or talking with the guests to figure out the kind of they are, so you can find a solution for them. Okay, so here are the bonus points. You said you have a big program in the destination. First bonus point is shopping spot. Chinese guests love shopping. So when you bring them to local market, don't just give them 15 minutes, at least 30 minutes, so they can explore and then they can shop, buy gifts or souvenirs with friends or bring home. And also, if they go to a US cities, they would like to spend a lot of time in outlet or those famous brand shops because those products are more expensive in China. So make sure they have enough time to shop. They will be very satisfied during the trip. So the second bonus point is photo stop. When you have a Chinese group, you will see Chinese guests like to take photos, either with their very expensive camera or with their smartphones. They take photos everywhere because the photos is kind of a show off factor. They want to take the photos and share it on the social media right away and telling them friends, look, I'm here in front of the Sydney Opera House. So make sure your guide is aware of this and your guide can also help them to take good photos. When coming to managing experience, there is another thing you can do to enhance their experience by providing more interactions. Experiential travel is all about experience, but Chinese guests are normally too shy to get involved or invite themselves into the activities, unlike Western guests who are more independent. So if you don't invite them to participate, normally they wouldn't just join proactively. For example, like this picture here, we were in a local village and while we're visiting, the villagers invite us to join them to join their local dance. You can see that the guests want to do it, but they were very shy, so they were hesitating. So what our guide did was great. The guide went to hold their hands and then bring them to the dance floor. So the guests really enjoying it, and that's what they were talking about for the rest of the day. So Chinese guests are learning how to be more involved, how to enjoy it, but still they're not good at doing this. So they need guidance and invitation by your guide and by your staff. So they will love the experience. By doing this, you also give them a lot of attention, which Chinese guests like the attention. They want to be treated as VIP. So make sure your guide understand this so they can give a lot of attention to the guest. Again, here I'm talking more about this typical Chinese guest behavior. But of course, there are a lot of Chinese guests who are more international or more westernized that will behave differently. Okay, what about sustainability? In 2017, there are 130 million Chinese tourists traveling abroad. The impact is phenomenal. As we're talking here, this is a very difficult question to answer, but I think it's necessary to put it here, to bring it up, because I believe in sustainable travel. But when I hear about the story of Chinese guests that lack of respect for the environment or litter in the forest or interact with endangered species, I feel embarrassed. The Chinese government is actually also aware of this situation and have put a lot of measurement in place. For example, there are guidebooks and then pre-travel classes for tourists, and also there are blacklists for troublemaking passengers. At the same time, in the industry, a lot of Chinese tour operators are also doing this by giving very thorough briefing before trips. So this is what I'm very glad to see, that in China, in the industry, the awareness of responsible travel keeps increasing among travelers and the trade, the industry. At the same time, there is also an increasing number of educational NGOs that are working with schools to raise awareness among the younger generations. So this is what's happening in China. So on the other hand, I would suggest our overseas tour operators also should avoid the stereotype that Chinese tourists are not behave responsibly. Help the guest, help them to understand why they should or should not do this. It is about education. If the tour operators also take the responsibility to bring the education to the Chinese guest, it will help to improve the situation quickly. We're a fast learner, so I believe eventually Chinese guests will travel in a responsible way that follow the international standard. Okay, next, communication. How to communicate with your guest and your client in China. So the green logo on the upper left is called the WeChat. WECHAT, WeChat is the most useful communication tool in China. It has the function as a messenger, which you can send messages, but it's also served as a social media platform. So if you start to deal with Chinese client, download this app, set up an account, and then you're up to date. Also, it is very good to have your guide download this app. So when they're with a Chinese group, they can communicate with the group, send the guests a photo they take, and then give them notice about everyday briefing. It will be very useful. Wi-Fi. As mentioned earlier, Chinese guests like to take photos and then share it right away. So make sure the Wi-Fi is available where they go. And lastly, another useful tool is QQ, which is mostly used in business. So in the office, as a lot of travel company, the office staff like to use QQ for instant messaging. So in this last page here, I'm going to teach you 3 Chinese words that will help to understand Chinese culture better. So the first one is 面子, means face. You can try repeat after me, 面子. It literally means face, but more than physical face, it means your reputation, how people perceive you, or the image that you want people to think of you. So in Chinese society, people care their mian so much. For example, if you are in China and you're invited by a Chinese friend to dinner, first, you attending this dinner is giving your friends 面子. Then your friend will probably order a lot of dishes that more than 2 of you can eat. More dishes means more 面子 of your friend. Then when you're dealing with your Chinese guests on the trip, so remember to give them 面子, make them feel special, feel like VIP. Sometimes the differentiation treatment will make them very happy. For example, a fast track to enter a museum or a private car while the other big group will have a big bus. That will make them feel have a lot of 面子. That's some bonus points here. So this is the first word, 面子. The second word is 关系, means connections. 关系. In China, in the business world, is all about 关系. 关系 actually comes from the personal bond first, then business relationship. It starts with people making friends and building trust. That is why it's really important to work with the right people in the market, because they have the good 关系 that will make your job a lot easier. So the last word here is an adjective. The pronunciation is 差不多. It means more or less. We use this word pretty often on the daily conversation. I would say it represents one typical Chinese attitude. It is kind of a mindset to pursue an acceptable standard instead of being perfect. It is said that this word started in around 1970s when China was developing so fast with limited resources. So often people have to improvise to get things done, use an alternative solution instead of finding the best solution. So today, the 差不多 attitude become part of the culture. So when you ask a guest whether they enjoy their trip, if they give you a 差不多 answer, it means it's okay. The trip is acceptable. They would not complain, but it doesn't mean they are 100% satisfied. In Chinese culture, we tend to keep our opinions, and in generally, we don't like to complain. But also, it doesn't mean that we're very happy or satisfied with the service. It is acceptable, especially when there is a foreign guide. The Chinese guests don't feel comfortable to share their real opinion, but it's possible that they may complain to their tour operator after the return home. So sometimes people say that there's no like perfect or great service in China. I wouldn't really argue that, because we do have this 差不多 attitude, this acceptable attitude in China when it comes to service. But if you look at it the other way, it actually makes it really easy for you to impress your Chinese guest, because the service we receive in China is 70% good. But if you can make the trip experience the right way and 100% good, then it will be their best trip ever. Okay, that was my last slide, and then this is my contact details. So if you are interested in this market, feel free to reach out, and then I'm very happy to answer questions. So now I'm handing this over back to Dan.
Okay, that was fantastic, Fana. Folks, I just want to share a couple things real quick. People are using two different places for questions, which is just fine. Either the questions tab, or if you locate towards the bottom, there's also the chat. Pedro, you had posted a question and I accidentally hit delete. So if you wouldn't mind sending that again, I'd love for us to be able to answer your question. Everybody else, keep sending those questions in. We're going to have some time right at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. Okay, so Fana brought up some fantastic insight as to who these travelers are and what some of their expectations and needs are. And so what I'd like to share with you is information that might be useful in terms of adapting your programs in order to meet those needs. And this could be not specific to Chinese travelers, but any of your guests where the language of your tour or trip is in a different language than what is their main language. So if you're doing English language tours, then if people where English is their second language. And a key part of this is making the program experiential. Do more, say less. For people who are used to where the language that the tour is in is not their main language, it's going to be very difficult to pay attention to long briefings and stories and content. But if you can get that information across through an activity or through an experiential component, it's going to be way more powerful. And again, our key point here is not to uh, uh, our key point here is that we know that travel can be transformational, it can change people's lives. And we feel that this is a great way to impact a very important segment of the traveling public, and that are Chinese travelers. And so if we can still have folks walk away from our trips with incredible experiences, even if they're not able to understand everything that we're saying, that's great. So do more and say less. Another way to make your program more experiential is to add visuals. This is especially true in your introduction. If you're a guide or if you're a trip designer, you know that it's those first 5, 10, 15, maybe if it's a long trip, the first half day, where you really have the opportunity to capture your guests. And so if you're counting on using a bunch of words and jokes and things like that to get that across, and your guests are not English as a first language, then if you can add some photographs, like here, I was in Iceland with Icelandic mountain guides, and they did a tour here, and actually the participants in our group were deaf. And so that was a good challenge for the guest, because she couldn't, or for the guide, because she couldn't say anything because she didn't speak sign language. So, but she was able to use the map. She was able to use visuals. She had her phone with pictures on it, and she really adapted well. And I think that using techniques like that for anybody where they're not able to speak proficiently the language of your tour is a great technique. The reality is a lot of the ideas that Fana shared about customer service and what I'm sharing, these are probably pretty good ideas whether your guests speak your language or not. But this is especially true for people where they don't speak your language as their primary language. So the visuals is especially important when you're talking about safety. So for those of you who are on this webinar who do more adventure or experiential tours, you know that safety is an important component. And so really making sure that guests are aware of the safety as well as the sustainability components of the trip is essential. The other thing is, and I know this from my own experience when I travel in other parts of the world, I speak a little bit of Spanish, but I don't have all the vocabulary that I would like. So even if I'm attending a tour or a program in Spanish, if the guide or the presenter can share the information in more than one way using some different vocabulary and some different words, I might better understand what he or she is trying to share with me, because maybe I didn't know all the words, but I knew some of them. Similarly, repeat more than once. So this is especially true about safety and about using technical equipment, but also about the main idea, or what is the moral of the story, or the mission that you're trying to share with your guests. And again, hands-on experiential activities are more impactful. Rather than tell people, in the case here, we were doing a sea turtle restoration program in Mexico, rather than tell them how researchers measure the turtles and how they record data, here we were giving tape measures to the guests and able to work directly with the turtles. This is awesome for any of your guests, no matter what languages they speak, but especially those who are speaking a different language than yours. Having activities where they can do and participate is really important. So again, do more, say less, add visuals, find more than one way to say what you need to say and repeat it. And then adding in those hands-on experiential activities will make your trips way more impactful. So let's talk finally about some customer service considerations. And I think this is really important because as especially those folks who are working in experiential travel, as we know, the customer is not always right. If they're about to step off of a cliff, that's you can't accommodate that. If they're about to trample over some threatened habitat or interact with an endangered animal or any wildlife for that matter, we know that that's just not okay. And similarly, when our customers are engaging with our community, they may not ever go back to that community, but we are going back there for every one of our trips, every one of our tours. And so we need to make sure that our communities are benefiting from travel and are feeling respected. So if guests want to do things that aren't in line with any of those aspects, we have to somehow deal with that. Nobody likes to be told no. Nobody likes to be slapped on the wrist or scolded in front of everybody. So the key here in customer service is that we're planning ahead and anticipating where there could be issues and dealing with it far ahead of time. And again, I think this is especially true with this demographic because, as Fana said, Chinese travelers have not had the luxury of traveling around the globe for decades. This is a relatively new and we're seeing a lot of travelers all at once. And so the learning curve is high. Fana pointed out that it's not a lack of desire to be in line with sustainability and socially responsible. It's a lack of knowledge in most cases, and possibly no one has ever taught them. So here's, like I said, a great opportunity for us to have a positive impact on the world by doing this right. So here are just a couple thoughts. Again, for your guides and for your frontline staff, remember, they are not just advocating your company, they're out there being a spokesperson for the community. They're out there representing the environment and speaking for the sustainability. So this is an important role that they play. It does require training. So some considerations. Remember that great customer experiences are deliberate, planned, and consistent. Anticipating what is going to happen, the perhaps lack of experience from your guests in the environment that you're traveling, making sure that information is clear and repeated, and therefore you're going to avoid ever having a bad customer service experience because your guests are prepared and doing the right things from the beginning. You also need to have your message organized and clearly shared with the group. So knowing what your message is ahead of time, making it using language that's easy to understand, and sharing it in timely manner is important. The other thing, as Fana said, and this is definitely true when I travel in countries where it's not my English is the first language there, is to identify and anticipate unexpressed needs. People are often shy to speak up when they don't have a complete master of the language. Fana pointed out that Chinese travelers in general are more hesitant to speak up. So there are probably plenty of needs that are being expressed. If we want to bring our trips to 100%, or since I'm American, we always want to go to 110%, versus just the 70%, this is a great opportunity to really get inside the head of our travelers and figure out what they want, even when they don't even know that they want it. So how do we do that? We ask questions and get to know them. We watch for body language. And most importantly, we just need to make it a safe and welcoming environment for them to feel like it's okay to speak up, even if they don't feel completely confident about what the language they're using. Our directions, especially when it comes to safety, sustainability, giving clear and concise directions, and making sure that if the plan changes for whatever reason, which when we're dealing with environments and schedules and other people, it can change at any time, that our guests are aware of it. There's nothing worse than anticipating a part of the tour only to find out that it was canceled days ago, but they never found out. we can often look to, oh, well, this trip was bad because the guests just weren't prepared, or they uh, weren't following the rules. That is the wrong attitude, in my opinion. My opinion is we own the client relationship. It's up to us as the provider of these experiences to know that we have the capability and the power to send these guests home having their life changed. We have the possibility to be in control and own the relationship so that we're not dealing with these unforeseen situations because we planned ahead and we prepared for them. So again, great customer experiences are deliberate, planned, consistent. Be prepared with an organized and clear message ahead of time. Identify and anticipate unexpressed needs. Give clear and concise directions and information in a timely manner. And very specifically, own the client relationship. Know that it's up to you. So now what? What is, we've shared a handful of information with you that hopefully will be useful for you in the next few months. Hopefully you can implement some of these ideas, and they've given you some inspiration for how to approach this important market of travelers. Well, we're not going to stop there. Fana and I have decided to team up on doing a couple more webinars this year. And since you signed up for this, you will be on the email list to learn about the upcoming ones. So we're going to do in September a webinar on product development. So focusing specifically on this market, what are some products and experiences that we can design that will, again, have these guests going home raving about it, saying everybody needs to go on this trip. In November, it doesn't do you any good if you create a life-changing program and no one signs up for it. So we're going to talk about some marketing strategies to attract Chinese travelers. That includes some supply chain, how to work directly with agencies in China. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in both of those webinars. Similar to this one, we've got an hour to talk with you about these topics. If you want to go more in depth, we want to make sure that we're there for you. So Fana and I are teaming up to work in two different capacities. One is to work directly with your business. So how to Chinify your experiences, or make sure that what you're providing is going to be life-changing and impactful for these guests. Some of that has to do with how your staff is interfacing. So some staff training, both whether it's your guides or other participants. Product development, connecting to the supply chain, and PR and marketing. Well, destinations may want to host some in-person workshops, bring Fana and I to your destination, or do some more online workshops where it's a little bit more in depth, covering some of those topics up above. And then similarly, if your destination wants to start developing these trade relationships, then we can also help with that. All right, so as promised, we have about 15 minutes until the webinar is concluded, and we wanted to save time to answer some of the questions that you have that have come in, as well as I've got a handful of questions that I wanted to share, or I wanted to get Fana's input on as well. So Fana, you can unmute yourself now and come back into the conversation, and she might also have some questions or comments about things that I said as well. So welcome back, Fana.
Okay, I'm here.
So I have a question that came up when I heard your presentation about knowing whether a restaurant is authentic or not, because I've been in South America, I've gone to chifas, and I would agree that there are some varying degrees of authenticity. I also live in Seattle, and we have some great restaurants here that are authentic. And I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit of information about how we might be able to know whether a restaurant is authentic.
Okay, that's a good question, as actually often been asked as well. So for us, is easy to judge. We can just go and taste, right? So if you cannot find, well, there are, I would say, two ways. So find a Chinese friend that who can go with you to taste if this restaurant is authentic. So that's one way. And then another way is that if you don't have any Chinese friend around, you can see if this Chinese restaurant are more often visited by Chinese people or the local non-Chinese. So if it's visited more by the Chinese people, then it's definitely more authentic. So that's will help you to find a restaurant.
That's great. And I just wanted to clarify or just make sure that I understood. You said that if an authentic restaurant is not available, but there are other Asian restaurants like a Thai restaurant or Japanese restaurant, that might actually be more preferable than an inauthentic Chinese restaurant. I assume that, first of all, just whether that, if I understood that correctly, and also I assume that those restaurants would also need to be authentic for it to actually be a good alternative.
Right. Yeah, it's better to be an authentic Japanese or Thai restaurant to replace, a non-authentic Chinese restaurant. And then I think maybe sometimes it's easier to find a Thai restaurant than an authentic Chinese restaurant. So that really depends on what kind of restaurant you're available in your area, and try to find the most authentic ones. So because Chinese guests are pretty picky about the food.
Excellent. This is important. And just a couple more for me because we are actually getting some good questions here that I want to make sure we have time for. One, I just wanted to, there was a little bit where the audio started to cut out, and I apologize to folks for that. We did fix that, but I wanted you to repeat. There was one slide that you brought up that were kind of two bonuses. One was about the shopping, and the other one was about the photographs. If you can just repeat that information for folks, since the audio
Okay.
cut out a little bit there.
Okay, so these are the two bonus point I call on when you arrange a trip program, because so besides what you normally have as the travel experience, so one thing you need to remember to always add in is the shopping stops. So Chinese guests love shopping. When you bring them to a local market, give them enough time, at least 30 minutes, so they can explore and really shop, buy souvenirs for their friends or to bring back home. And if you're in major cities like in Europe or US, they like to spend a lot of time in outlet or the famous big brand shops. So make sure they have enough time to shop. This is very important. And then the second bonus point is photo stop. You will see that Chinese guests like to take photos, either with very expensive cameras or with their smartphones. They like to take photos everywhere they go because it's in some way it's a show off factor. So they want to take the photos and then share in their social media on their WeChat right away, and then to tell their friends, look, I'm traveling here. So it's important to make sure that your guide is aware of this, and then they can also help the guests take good photos. So these are the two bonus points that will add more highlights for your guest.
Excellent. Thank you for repeating that. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'm going to, I can talk to Fana anytime. So I'm going to move on to other people's questions, but thank you so much. That was very, very insightful what you shared with us. So first of all, we had a question from South America here, and the question is, South America was mentioned as an upcoming destination for Chinese travelers. Would you have any insight as to their perspective about destination Guyana and readiness to come to this destination?
Actually, there are already a lot of Chinese guests traveling to South America. Of course, compared to, like, say, Asia or Europe, the number is still less, but it keeps growing. So first of all, the Antarctica is a big destination. So when people go to Antarctica, they always want to combine with a few South American destinations. And when travel to South America, because it's far, so fly from Beijing to there need at least like 23 hours, include all the transfers. So often that you see that the programs always combine about 2 or 3 countries for one trip. and then sometimes they even combine more countries. So if you are selling the program to the Chinese guests, don't just sell one country. At least start from two, because it's really far for us to travel there. And another thing is that for the destination, people will be keep going back to South America. So that's something that you need to aware, to have a good balance of the length of travel and then also the program. Another thing I noticed is that for South America is a very attractive destination, but in terms of the facilities, mainly the Chinese speaking guide is something that I find overall this destination is missing, because I've worked with a lot of South American travel agencies, and I found this is kind of a challenge there. So if you can be ready and then have some Chinese speaking guide available for the group, I think that will really add a lot of advantage to you.
That's great advice. And I also would like to add on to a couple things. One thing you highlighted, and I think we're all relatively aware of this, is that this is a newer market. And so we're talking about travelers who don't have the same experience. So this is a great opportunity to create lifelong fans. And so, for example, Guyana was the person questioning here, or the country where the question came from. But are there other countries nearby that you could team up with in order to do co-op marketing to get folks to come there, and then recognize that maybe they're only going to spend a day or two in your destination, but that day or two could lead to a 3-week trip in a few years. And so just recognizing that this is an investment every time a traveler comes, even if they're just hitting your capital city and not able to get into the off the beaten path, knowing that how you work with them at that very beginning could lead to a long time relationship with them, or at least a future trip. So I think that's important, and teaming up with those destinations nearby is great. So moving on here to maybe some tougher questions. We've gotten a few questions. I'm going to kind of sum them up. I think that there is, so this was also from South America as well, which is great to hear that Chinese travelers are making it to South America, and that's one of my favorite destinations for sure. I wanted to ask is how to deal with rude tour leaders. So I think part of the challenge is that you've got, in some of these groups, you've got the groups coming with tour leaders from China who maybe are not recognizing their in-country partners as clients, and versus the other way around. And sometimes aren't necessarily dealing with the guests themselves in a way that meets the hospitality standards of the supplier in the country. So I'm wondering if you have any tips, Fana, for dealing with the tour leaders themselves. And I think maybe we can also expand that to just the travel supply chain in general.
Okay, so it is true that it's pretty common that you see that when the Chinese groups go into South America, they always come with a tour leader. And there are a couple of reasons. One is what I mentioned is the language, because sometimes there are only English speaking guide available, so the group tour leader will do the translation. Need to do the translation. And then second, because it's such a long trip, so they need to do the overall coordination, collect the passport, and then that's what they're supposed to do. So to collect the passport and then also coordinate with the guest. And then also because there's a lot of transaction during travel. So to deal with the Chinese trip leaders, I would say just treat them as partners, treat them as a colleague. When I have the trips to South America, before the trip, I always have a briefing with the local guide who I'll be working with. So that can start it by you probably could start that. So if you know if a trip leader is coming to your destination, your guide or the people who work on the trip can suggest that to have a call to get to know each other, because normally it's a long trip that you will work together. So get to know each other and then start talking before they arrive at the destination, it helps the trip leader to understand of the way that you're working, and also it improves the communication between the two parties. So they wouldn't see you as, okay, you are just a supplier on the ground, then I'm the client. So make them treat you as your colleague, you're a team, you're supposed to be working together. So it's also important to know that any to make sure the trip leader knows that you are supporting him or her to make this trip successful, because a lot of time the guest will come to the trip leader for any of the questions, any of the requirement, because the trip leader is normally Chinese and speaking the language. As I mentioned, that Chinese guests maybe feel not really comfortable speaking with your local English speaking guide, so they will always come to the trip leader to solve problem. So if you make sure that the trip leader knows that you are always supporting him or her to get any problem solved, then they will always be very appreciated to work together. So it's really about communication, make sure that you know each other before the trip starts, and then also make sure that you team up to do the job well.
That's great. And I think that comes back to the idea of owning the client relationship. And the tour director is part of your client. But I think that this is a challenging thing when you deal with that. And I would suggest pulling that person aside and making some things clear in terms of what is acceptable and what isn't. And again, that comes down to owning the client relationship. Well, we're just about 30 seconds away from being at the end of our webinar, and I just wanted to make sure that I said thank you to everybody for sticking around. Pretty much everybody that was here at the beginning is still here, so that's a good sign. And I want you to make sure that you stay in touch with us. If we can answer questions later on, and we'd love to help you work with this incredible audience. So thank you so much, everybody, and we hope to stay in touch with you. And again, we'll send up some follow-up emails after this webinar. One other quick question now, because I just want to make sure that respect people's time since we are at the top of the hour if people have to drop off. But I do want to answer a couple more questions that came in. So Fana, if you can hang around for just a second. One of the questions was, what are the current demographics that are going to South America? Millennials, older families, groups, etc. Is there any general trend that you're aware of, or are we just talking about all travelers are in different respects?
I feel in general that people travel to South America are the ones that who are more experienced in traveling. So when people go to a destination that far, they always go to the destination nearby first. So a lot of people have been to Europe, have been to North America, have been to Asia. So after all this destination, they will go to South America. So in terms of travelers, so they're always experienced travelers. And in terms of a demographic group, I would say is quite I've seen people of all different like profiles. So there are people in their like 30s, 40s to travel with friends, which is very actually very popular. And then there are also a lot of independent travelers, generally much younger, will do like backpacking trip. But that's still a very small number for the independent traveler because not a lot of people speak Spanish. So that is a challenge there. But I've also seen that people in their 50s or 60s, there are like more like wealthy, very like luxury kind of trip. So they have done private jet trips to South America. So I would see a very mixed demographic travelers here.
That's great. And I think what we'll discuss in the fall with our two webinars is I think really identifying who do we want to visit our destination, who do we want to take our trips, and then marketing directly to them. So if our trip is going to be better for a more experienced traveler or somebody who maybe has a little bit more mastery of the language that the tour is in, that's important information, not to attract everybody to our trips. Great question. two more questions and then we'll call it a day. Again, thanks everybody for sticking around. Fana, thank you for doing this with me today. This has been a lot of fun. One question came in from Costa Rica in terms of other countries in Central America that might be good partners. Like are people traveling? Costa Rica is a pretty well-known destination around the globe. Are they also visiting other countries at the same time when they go to Costa Rica? And if so, what are they?
Well, from what I see now, Costa Rica has been often that just a destination by itself, and it hasn't been a very, I would say, it hasn't been a very like top popular destination because it's mostly focused on the nature. So a lot of, I would say, a lot of nature lovers will, or wildlife lovers will go to Costa Rica, but people will actually always choose maybe some other, let's say, Ecuador first or some other destination in South America before they, go to Costa Rica. I think it's the destination probably is not as known as other South American destinations. So it's for very specific, I would say it's for very specific groups that will go to the destination.
That's really good information. So, as you pointed out when we looked at the map earlier, you highlighted that within China, and this is a no-brainer for anybody who knows that China is a huge country. But again, I think we have to be reminded of this, that even within the destination or the country of China, we're talking about a diverse peoples with diverse interests. So Costa Rica is not going to attract necessarily, not that there isn't great culture and interesting things there, but it may not be the top on the list for that. So it's not going to attract the Chinese traveler that are specifically looking for cultural activities. That said, those who are looking for ecotourism or adventure tourism, it could be top on the list. So really focusing on what that specific demographic is going to go to Costa Rica versus going to Ecuador or Peru, which is a little bit better known for the cultural aspects. So that's good. The last one is from Atma, who says, can you talk about the market for local adventure travel within China? So if a company wanted to, I'm not sure if this was, I think this is referring to the Chinese market that travels domestically. What are some of what's about the adventure travel market within the country? Does that exist, and where is it at in terms of development?
I think in the adventure travel within China, I would say it's more still in the softer adventure. For example, like hiking would be is actually very popular within China. There are a lot of mountains, like people want to go do like the hiking, and also, the Great Wall. There are hikes, you can do multiple day hikes. And for other type of adventure, let's say like kayaking or biking, I think that recent years biking has been growing quite fast. A lot of people like to go biking in the Qinghai Lake, which is like a high plateau area, but it's very great for biking. So there are different activities, I would say, starting to be very popular in the sector of adventure travel, but it's still something that new to the China market, because for us, like when come to travel, people will always first choose the culture destination, and then they will choose like the island, like beach resort. Then maybe after all these choices, then they will think about adventure travel and then have some more things, more activity involved. But this is very new, so there are more people interested in different activities, but it's still something very new. But one very popular trend here is that people like to doing a lot of this marathon related travel. So running marathon has been a huge thing in China, I think maybe in the past 5 years, and then now people actually will travel to destination to run a marathon. So that has been growing really fast.
Interesting. So, and I think that that's an important technique in general, is that, okay, so we want to maybe grow a certain sector of the audience for a type of travel, whether it's ecotourism or adventure or something like that, but really focusing on how can you combine it with an existing, either focus directly on who's wanting that type of travel and not try and get everybody else, or if we want to grow that market, incorporating certain things that might get them engaged. Then they see how amazing an adventure tourism program could be, or a ecotourism program could be, or vice versa. And then all of a sudden you've got somebody whose their whole mode of travel is going to be changing. So good point on that with the marathons and the races element. So before we sign off, if Ellen is still on from Iceland, I want to say happy birthday to you. And thanks for being here, and hopefully we can catch up soon. Fana, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was fantastic, and I learned a ton, and you're a wonderful person to work with. So hopefully we'll get to get a lot of these folks hanging out with us in September and November for our upcoming webinars. And of course, folks, please stay in touch and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. Thanks again.
Thank you.